Let's see. Miss English, would you please lead us in the flag salute? Just a reminder to all the speakers, red light on your microphone. If it is on, it is muted. So just please to unmute it, just hit the button. And then once you're done, just hit the button again, please. Ms. Serrano, when we have the roll call, please.
Steve DeBrum,
Present.
Pam Ibeck, Miss English,
Present.
Ann Baird,
Here.
Bob Mooney,
Present.
James Grunsky,
Present.
Mike Morowitz,
Present.
Mitchell Oster,
Present.
Oscar Valdez,
Present.
Summer Panino, excused absence, Angel Ann Flores,
Present.
Esau Hernandez,
Present on Zoom.
Steve White, Mary Joan Starr,
Here.
Richard Silverman.
Here, present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now take action on the minutes from the previous meeting. Has everyone had the opportunity to review the minutes? Make a motion for approval.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to move on the minutes from the previous meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Thank you. I'd like to take this moment to introduce Mr. Mitchell Oster, who is a new representative from District 2, representing Ms. Miller. Okay, do we have any agenda deletions, additions, or deletions? Seeing none, we shall proceed on. Mr. Fowler, you have any comments?
Yes, Chair, we did receive some comments. So these comments are submitted to the redistricting email account. And specifically, we have 9, and I'll just share the summary with you. There was a request sent on August 17th from Monica Miranda, Director of Policy for the Stockton Younger Women's Task Force, to have a supervisorial redistricting presentation conducted for their membership. There was email communication from Pam Ibeck to Robert Martin, District 4 Community of Interest, Ag Protecting and Development, Ag Growth and Expansion. Robert subsequently wanted to contact the contact information for Stanislaus County's redistricting. There's an email from a resident who had technical issues joining the last RAC outreach meeting. I believe we've resolved those. There was email from a homeless person sharing her challenges. Email from Stephen Fox requesting that the new districts represent both parties in the United States and that they are equal in numbers of legally registered voters. There's a request from Rich and Diane Robbins to see the current maps. There's a request from Eric Rader that the RAC draw straight lines. There were general comments about gerrymandering, losing faith in our institutions and government, and leaving things as they are. And finally, there was an email from Brian Alvarez, program chairman with the Tracy Rotary Club, requesting a presentation. That concludes the compilation, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I did have the opportunity to speak to Ms. English. She will follow it up with Mr. Alvarez, make an appointment and make the presentation to the Tracy Rotary Club. Do we have any RAC member disclosures?
Yes. Ann
Right
Baird on Zoom. I have 2. I went to a meeting at APSARA, that's Asian Pacific. They're an Asian Pacific group. They're mostly Cambodians. Many of their members were involved in the Cleveland school shooting years ago. It was about something else, but they asked me about redistricting. So I wound up going through all the talking points and giving out the websites. The same thing happened at a subcommittee of the Human Trafficking Task Force that I am on, the advocacy work group, and they asked about redistricting and I did the same thing.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Ms. Ibeck?
I have a few to report. First of all, I did a follow-up with Monica from the Stockton Young Women's Task Force, and we have a date scheduled for me to meet with them on Thursday, September 23rd from 6 to 7 p.m. League of Women Voters, I continue to be in communication with them. We have a tentative presentation from me to the group next Wednesday from 7 to 9, but I've not gotten a confirmation nor a confirmation as to whether they'd like an additional person there. I sent a generic email with information and encouragement of people to participate in this redistricting effort to the Chief of Staff, Denise Warmington. I hope I pronounced her last name correctly, from District 4, and asked her to send that out to various groups that she thought might be be interested in providing input. I've not heard back from her or a confirmation as to whether or not that was out. I'll close that loop with you once I hear back from her. I'm also on the board of the San Joaquin County United Way, and I offered to give a brief presentation to the leads of nonprofit organizations in San Joaquin County that meet on a monthly basis. And I need to confirm, but I will tentatively be talking to them about this effort as well.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Seeing none and no one online, correct? I did not hear that. Thank you. Okay, item 7, RAC community contacts. Other than the ones Ms. Ibeck spoke of, is there any others? Okay. We'll now move on to item 8, legacy data 2020 census population. That is going to be Mr. Chris Chafee from the Redistricting Partners. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. So for this presentation, we're going to be going over the current lines and with the legacy data from the Census Bureau, informing us as their populations and current ethnic populations. I think you've seen this before, so this is kind of a refresher. So here are the current district lines. And you can see in this data table that on the top, we have the 2020 census populations. And in the bottom of the page, we have the citizen voting age population. And I think the key for this to start are the first 3 lines under 2020 census. This shows the current district lines and their current populations. And what we're really interested in is to see what the total deviations are of the current lines. And as you can see, District 4 is underpopulated by 8.1%. The smallest current line or current district by population, whereas District 5 is overpopulated by 14.8%. And so the total population or total deviation, excuse me, of the current lines with the census data set that has been released is 22.9%. Now, as a refresher, we're allowed for local jurisdictional redistricting to have a total deviation of 10%. So if you wanted to, and as some comments have been sent in about just keeping them as they are, you couldn't do that legally. The current lines are too out of deviation to be repeated. The other thing just to note that this isn't the final data set that we'll be using to draw the district lines, because this is the 2020 legacy data set that was released by the census. But under the Fair Maps Act, which kind of guides our process in this round of redistricting, we have to wait for the statewide database to reallocate the state prison population back into their residency prior to incarceration. So that data set should be coming out by, and I say should be because with the census this cycle, you never know, should be coming out by September 20th, so that for your next meeting, we'll be doing a very similar presentation like this, but with the final data numbers so that you'll know what the actual current populations are for the underlying districts. The other thing in this presentation that we just want to touch on is the citizen voting age population. So the citizen voting age population is another data set put out by the US Census, specifically developed for the Department of Justice to look into Section 2 compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Now, from I think your second or third meeting, we went into what the Voting Rights Act is, the importance of protecting minority voting power, especially if they have a concentrated population that can meet the 50 plus CVAP designation. So that's what this is. This data, the citizen voting age population, is what we look to see if we can create an area with a 50 plus minority population in a current district. And so one thing to note is that in District 1, right now, as currently drawn, it's at 47.7% citizen voting age population by Latino. So it is very close to that 50 plus number that we want to see, if possible, to draw. So to determine if you have to draw a Section 2 seat. And now this is going to come forward in our next meeting. We'll talk about it in more detail. But I just want to point that out to you from this report, and note that we will be talking through it in much greater detail at a later meeting. But that's, I think, an important thing just to note from the current lines. So the other thing that I think is from this discussion that we should start talking through is, how do we move from where we are now, where we have community of interest lines or maps submitted from Districtor. We have people emailing in descriptions on what you guys should do going forward as you get into draft maps. Just kind of talk through, and for a very short time, kind of the process we're going to go through from now until we have those draft maps to recommend to the Board of Supervisors in, I think it's in November. But in starting that discussion, really just a reminder, right? We have a December 15th deadline to pass final lines. Well, the Board of Supervisors does under the Fair Maps Act. And early on, a lot of us thought that the legislature was going to change that deadline. They didn't. Nothing went through to change the Fair Maps deadline. So cities and counties that have primaries have to complete their process by December 15th. So we don't have any extra time to have meetings and to go through draft maps. The second thing is, I just wanted to show you, of course, our next handful of meetings. And I'm gonna go through each of those meetings and kind of give you an outline of what to expect. So today we're in Tracy. In 2 weeks, we'll be in Lodi, and we'll introduce the statewide databases, final population numbers. And then we'll jump into the October 13th draft map introduction meeting. And so working towards those draft maps, again, our goal is to make sure to include the community of interest testimony that we've received, go through an analysis of the maps that the public has submitted, so you understand if they're within 10% deviation, if they comply with the Voting Rights Act, if they split cities or neighborhoods, and other pieces of information, so you can kind of look at the map submitted by the public in an objective manner. For us, the redistricting partners to present draft maps to you to review as well, that will go through the same kind of analysis so that you will know that the maps submitted by John Smith and the maps that redistricting partners are presenting have the same kind of analysis provided to the RAC so that you know you can compare the two. And then, of course, really the most important thing from our perspective is hearing from you and the public about the public maps that are submitted and hearing your commentary, because you know these communities so well. If we got the lines right in our lines, or if we're taking a public map and kind of tweaking it so it meets that 10% total deviation, if it makes sense, the changes we made. And so I really hope that everyone on the dais and everyone joining on Zoom can provide that critical commentary on the maps we submit. Sorry.
Are we picking up some audio from online?
I think so. But it seems to have stopped. So
Okay.
So for the September 29th meeting we have in Lodi, some of the things that I just want to, again, remind you is that we'll be bringing forward the updated data set, the final data set with the current lines. We'll also be bringing with us a packet summarizing all the COI testimony that's been collected to date through the 29th, so that you guys can review that and have that for discussion at that outreach meeting if we have time to do it. And then I think it's also a great time to start talking through secondary objectives beyond the criteria from the Fair Maps Act of how you want us to draw maps to present to you on the 13th. So some of those objectives can be you taking into consideration growth, wanting to ensure that we don't not only split cities, but we don't want to split neighborhoods in Stockton when we split the Stockton up, or maybe using freeways or major thoroughfares in the cities we know we're going to have to split to create district lines. And there are many other objectives that you guys can present, like keeping all of the rural areas together or trying to deviate it or split them into multiple districts as they currently are. So I think for the 29th, if you want to think through some of the objectives that you're thinking through and you're hearing from the community when you go into community meetings or talk to your neighbors about this process, what is coming up and how you really want us as your consultants to kind of present those maps in October. So then for the October 13th meeting, that will be when we start presenting the draft maps. And ideally, that meeting will be a set of at least three draft maps. And what we love to be able to do is to take a publicly submitted map and elevate that to a draft map because it meets those objectives that we talked through on the 29th. It meets the 10% deviation, total deviation that we talk about. It's compliant with the Voting Rights Act and fits the Fair Maps Act criteria that we've talked through. Because it's great when a member of the public can be the basis for a draft map. And that's something so powerful that I think the Fair Maps Act is introducing in this redistricting cycle. So ideally, the draft maps will be based on those on publicly submitted ones. But if we find that there isn't enough variation between public maps submitted and that the public maps do not meet the criteria that we have discussed on the 29th, then we'll bring forward consultant-driven maps that meet your objectives and comply with both state and federal law. So, and that's really where we'll talk through on the 13th, those draft maps. The other thing we're going to want to show you is the community of interest maps that were submitted, how those fit into the draft maps. So there'll be a lot of visualizations for you. You'll get everything at least 7 days prior to the 13th meeting. So by October 6th, so that you'll have all the maps and the reports and everything to digest over a week's time rather than just getting them right before the meeting starts, because that's not fair to you or for the public. They'll also be published online so the public can see them too and be interactive on the 13th with their discussion. So then on the 13th, we'll go through the maps. You can talk through what you think of them, what changes need to be made. If maybe you like from Plan A, you like districts 1, 2, and 3, but you can't stand 4 and 5, and you like the districts 4 and 5 from Plan C. And we will then, after the 13th, for your meeting on the 27th, update those draft maps from your comments, so that hopefully by the end of the 27th meeting, we can pretty much have 1 or 2 plans that everybody kind of likes. So that on your final meeting on the 10th, we can put out a recommended draft plan to send to the Board of Supervisors. That's the arc really of your remaining meetings. I think this would be a good time to open up for questions, maybe about the process.
I've got a question about the process of submitting this to the Board of Supervisors. Does the RAC have any role in that? Should we attend the meeting? Does Steve, as the chair of the committee, stand up and present it formally, or is this all done sort of behind the scenes and they accept it and they just do their thing?
I think because this is the first time we've done it this way under the Fair Maps Act, that I think it can be a process that you guys discuss. I think a great idea, or maybe not a great idea, an idea of mine would be to have Steve or yourself come and present the recommendation, maybe read a statement to the Board of Supervisors introducing the maps. I think the consultant team and the team from the county will kind of put together the final report for you, the maps and that presentation, so that you don't have to worry about drawing maps or all that stuff. But an introduction would be great, and maybe a short commentary on the process and what drove you to recommend the map that you're presenting. I think the other thing that is like optional is you can present multiple recommended maps. Ideally, I think we would just submit one, but it's your prerogative if you want to submit multiple plans or multiple maps to the Board of Supervisors. But yeah.
Chris, thank you for that good presentation, nice information. I wanted to clarify something you said in your remarks. Is the inclusion of consultant-generated maps conditioned on an insufficient number of publicly submitted maps? You made it seem as though if there aren't enough good public maps, then we'll put some in. Or are we going to get some from you either way?
It depends. I think our hope is that most of the maps we present will be based on publicly submitted maps that we may have to tweak slightly to not split Tracy or not split a city, or maybe bring them into a better total deviation. But I think one of the things that I think we have to do as a consulting team is present you the binary choices in these maps, and make sure that you have all of the options out there. So we're not kind of forcing you down one pathway, because that's not what we want to do, right? We want this to be driven by the RAC and by community input. So if we find a scenario that's not provided by the public, we'll provide it. And if we feel that it needs to be more than 3 draft maps, maybe it needs to be 4 or 5, we'll go down that path as well. Because basically, we don't want to hide the ball in any manner from you. And for all the time you've put in, but also because we think the spirit of the Fair Maps Act is to really make sure that the public and you as the representatives have every opportunity to really guide the lines.
Is there anyone online that has any questions?
No questions at this time.
No questions. So could we go back to the first slide that you put up with the district numbers?
Sure.
So is, and what you had showed with District 5 at 14.8% increase and 4 at an 8.1% negative number. Of the total number, how many incarcerated people are still, those numbers still to come into the mix?
So we've done a preliminary kind of total, and we think that there will be around 4,000 to 5,000 people in the county that may be taken out and put back in, distributed around Northern California and throughout the state. But we don't know for sure because of it's hard to know exactly the number that the statewide database is working from because they haven't released that data. So, but we estimate 4,000 to 5,000.
4,000 to 5,000 people who are from San Joaquin County that are into the mix.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have any kind of an idea what those numbers might be, how that split might be?
I think that because this is the first year that they've done it this way, or first, I should rephrase that, the first census where they've basically taken state prison populations, removed them from a census block, and then reallocated them. There was actually a process in 2010 that allowed agencies to make a choice about removing the populations from census block entirely, and you just never got redistributed. So one of the hard parts for us is we don't know what the change is going to mean for San Joaquin County specifically. Like if we take out 5,000, how many do we get back in, right? We don't know that
Right.
with any, there's no clarity there. We don't know. And so it's hard for me I don't want to speculate to say you're going to get 1,000 back, like 20% of what was removed, because I don't have anything to base that number on. And I don't mean to hide the ball. I don't know.
Oh, that's quite all right. So and you indicated this is something new?
Yes, it was passed as part of the Fair Maps Act.
Okay.
The idea of taking out state prisoners and putting them back to their residency is a new concept that a number of states are actually going through nationwide in this cycle, California, New York, and a couple others.
And what success stories has everyone had with this opportunity?
We haven't seen it yet because it's the first time it's ever happened. It's funny, today, actually, the state of New York put out their reallocated prisoner census population. California will be putting it out by the 20th. So you'll be the guinea pigs to some extent to see how that works.
Okay.
Do
Very
we have do we have addresses for these people? Are they just allocated to the county, or are they allocated to particular districts or addresses, or what the heck?
Okay, so let me give you the answer that we have. Around 110,000 prisoners were in state facilities on April 1st of 2020. Of those 110,000, we have information about their former residency in California of about 90,000 people. Of those 90,000 people, we have actual addresses for around 2/3 or around 60,000 people. The other third, or about 30,000 people, they just have county residency prior to incarceration.
So if we have a low deviation in one district, we can just throw all the rest of them in there to fix it?
No, we don't get to do any of that. That's what the
Dang.
statewide database gets to do. So what the statewide database gets to do is, so for the 60,000 they have addresses for, they're going to put them in their census blocks, right? So they'll add them on.
Right. Yeah.
For the 30,000 people, they're just going to sprinkle them like salt on your steak all over the counties of their former residency based on population. So there's going to be some direct ads and some random ads by county.
Great.
I'm as happy as you are.
I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
What about the other 20,000 you left out?
They're going to not be added. they're going to go away. I think some of that is they may have not been California residents. So people flying into LAX or San Diego or wherever and being arrested and incarcerated in California, and their former residency was in another state or another country. I think there's also an issue with some people have been in prison longer than they have good records for. And so there's a little bit of everything mixed into this reallocation. And I think one of the other interesting things is hopefully going forward, like in 2030, this process will be much better. But the other thing that you guys don't get to deal with is the statewide commission has decided to zero out and try to reallocate all the federal prisoners. And the feds aren't playing ball and giving addresses, so they're just going to be zeroed out. So there's a couple different layers of this going on, and you guys get to work with the most organized
Criminals.
reallocation.
Question. Just so people understand, this prison population is like DBI is a good example, which is no longer, they've disbanded the DBI and moved prisoners all across the state now. So so as of April of 2020, this is what was in the prison. And we don't really know if these folks have been released or they're still there. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the interesting thing about the census, right, is it's just a time count.
Right.
So it's anybody wherever they were on April 1st of 2020. And that's where we get the 110,000 population number, is we just add up all of those numbers that the State Bureau turned over to the Census Bureau. And that's the number we're working from.
So you make the best, they make this, we don't do it, but the state does it. They'll come up with previous addresses and try to throw them, these folks, for lack of a better word, into the county. But like you say, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go into the districts correctly. They may make an attempt, but it's the first time they've done it. So, but it doesn't, I mean, I'm just looking at these numbers. I mean, is it going to deviate 3% for the whole?
I mean, my thing is you might see a change in the overall population of the district where there's any state prisons or state facilities. So you probably see a decrease in that district, but you're going to see a sprinkling. I think this is my word. You're going to see a slight addition, I think, to most of the census blocks in the county. And so the other districts shouldn't change that much.
Right. So for instance, DBI was in Tracy. Would they have counted that? Originally it's Tracy residents at the time,
Yeah. So
that's
right now,
that's the big number, right?
it would be in 5, right?
It would be
that
in 5. So that
population would
5
be in
could
5.
lose some folks just from the prison being, I mean,
Being there.
they've
Yeah.
kind of let, they're letting.
But
people
I
off.
think the thing you think about, right, is if Tracy 5 loses population, you still have 4 that's 8% under, right? So I don't think Tracy's going to lose enough to make the current lines balance.
Go under 10.
Yeah.
And that leads to my next question. So we have a 10% deviation. The negative 8.1 could be left alone. Not saying it would, but obviously the 14.8 legally cannot. Is that
Right.
correct?
Right.
Okay.
And remember, it's a total from the smallest to the largest, right?
Right. So that's still not going to do that.
Yeah.
Right. It's still going to be, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So one more question, and then do you have one?
Yeah, I had a question is, so they're reallocating people from the state prison. What about the county jail? Because are they just considered part of District 1 or because the jail's there? Or I'm not, I think it's in District 1. I'm not positive. but-
I think this has come up in other discussions, and one of the things about county jail is that when you fill out the census on April 1st, it talks about where your residency was. So a lot of the county jail population may have been counted at where they were when they were incarcerated or locked up. Not incarcerated, that's the wrong word, but right, put into county jail. So I think there's a general sense that for the county jail population, they were counted at their former residency because it's a shorter term stay. But again, this is the first time we're doing this prisoner reallocation. So I think there's going to be some discussion and some looking back at how it was done, what kind of records we have, and whether for 2030, if the state needs to work with the feds at a better rate, and maybe at the counties too, to look at the county jail populations, because that's come up, I think, in the 12 counties we've presented to, 11 of the 12. That's a general question, and it's something that we know the answer to, but I don't know if it's
Yeah,
if it's
because I
fair.
know theoretically a county jail inmate could be from another part of the state, or they could be local. Same thing like the feds, there's no federal facilities here that I'm aware of. But we could get a sprinkling back in from the federal facilities, but they're not releasing those numbers, so that won't affect us.
Exactly.
But so were they counted? Well, I don't know. I think there's still a federal facility in Pleasanton. So do those numbers go on to Alameda counties, or do they just disappear?
Well, for Alameda gets to choose to some extent, and the statewide commission is chosen to zero out the federal facilities.
Federal numbers.
Yeah.
So we've talked about those who are incarcerated, whether in county jails, state prisons, federal prisons, or whatever. I have not heard one word about the homeless population as to make the determination, were those numbers counted? How were
So-
they counted? Who was responsible for counting them? Where do those people live? So
I don't know how many of you guys were involved in the census project in the county, but many of the county tables throughout the state worked with the federal government and the Census Bureau to do the population count of the homeless population. And I believe it was conducted April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2020 in conjunction with both local and Census Bureau staff going through homeless encampments and counting people. And so they should be ingested they are ingested in the 2020 Census Legacy File data set that you've already seen.
Okay.
And that won't change.
Okay.
Taking into account the pandemic, it was much more truncated than it would have been. I was involved with some of those meetings, and there was a huge elaborate plan to count all the homeless that pretty much shrunk considerably when we realized what we were up against. So, undercount city.
Any other questions? Anything online?
No comments online.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and
Mr.
now,
Chafee, thank you.
thank you. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Liz Stitt, to go through the outreach presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Stitt, welcome.
Hi, it's so good to be back with you all. I am happy to be here. So this is the outreach presentation. I particularly want to welcome the members of the public who are watching online and here in person. All of you committee members have heard me say this before. So this is for the public. We really can't do this without public input. So today I will help go through the process for you to better understand it. So we'll be talking about redistricting basics, traditional redistricting principles, what is a community of interest, what does that mean for you? We'll talk about Districtor, which is the mapping tool that the county is using for public input. I'll also tell you the best ways for you to give your own public testimony on your communities of input. And then we'll round it out with the public hearing schedule. Okay, so let's get into it. What is redistricting? It is the process of adjusting district lines every 10 years after the release of the US Census. So folks tend to be a little bit more familiar with the congressional or state Senate assembly seat redistrictings. But local governments absolutely have to rebalance their lines as well. So just like San Joaquin County did 10 years ago, we're going to go through the process of rebalancing the supervisorial districts. And beyond creating districts of equal population, redistricting also serves to empower local communities and preserve voting rights. And so the structure that San Joaquin County has taken is all of you. So it is the 10-member redistricting advisory committee. They are helping in conducting community outreach, and they will be recommending a map or maps based on public input. So the goals of the RAC are conduct community outreach workshops like the one today, identify communities of interest from public input, create a set of draft district maps based on the input, and recommend a map to the Board of Supervisors. And here's our timeline. We are at the second outreach hearing, so September 15th. We will be having one more after the finalized data is out. So September 29th, we'll have our next outreach meeting. And then we'll start talking more about draft maps. So October 13th, October 27th, those will be opportunities for the public to start commenting on maps and start delivering their own district plans if they want to. And then there is a hard deadline of December 15th to have the maps finalized. And if all goes well, the county will have it finalized on December 7th. But I really do want to emphasize that the public is here and the public is expected to be a part of this process every step of the way. So whether we're talking about communities of interest or draft maps, the public is more than welcome to comment and give their own opinions. So traditional redistricting principles, these are what we use to sort of guide the process of drawing maps. They're here to prevent gerrymanders, to keep everything above board and transparent. So this list in front of us, this is a ranked list of criteria according to the Fair Maps Act. So first and foremost, districts have to be relatively equal in size, and that's equal in population, so in people, not citizens and not voters. The next one is contiguous. This is a word that you're really not going to hear outside of redistricting. It basically means that the district is one whole piece and that you can draw it with one line. And then maintain communities of interest is the next criteria. We're going to get a little bit more into what a community of interest is, but a quick definition is it's a group of people, a community, a neighborhood with similar policy concerns who would benefit from being maintained in a single district. And then the next criteria is follow city, county, local government lines when practicable. And then finally, keep districts compact, and that's compact in appearance and function. So let's get back to maintain communities of interest. I like to think of it as the building blocks for districts. So communities of interest could include ethnic and language minorities, but really this is a subjective and open-ended definition to be as inclusive as possible. And I do want to point out that there are protected classes under the Federal Voting Rights Act. So Latinos, Asians, and African Americans are considered a protected class. But I also want to point out that while communities of interest may include race, it cannot be the predominant factor in drawing district boundaries. There is an exception to this if there is found to be a Section 2 violation, then it would then we would have to draw based on race. But that's only if the lawyers tell us to. So, and then next, communities of interest. I want to show you how diverse a community of interest could be. So it could include historical communities, media markets, neighborhoods, school districts. I usually like to say that if you can make the argument that that your community is a community of interest, then it probably is, unless it's one of these three things. So under the Fair Maps Act, it explicitly prohibits these groups from being considered a community of interest. That includes political party affiliation, incumbents, political candidates. That is there to prevent political gerrymandering and incumbent gerrymandering. So again, we want to keep this above board and transparent. And then the next part is not prohibited under the Fair Maps Act. It is just really hard to draw. So groups of similarly minded people who do not share a similar location, or if the community of interest is county-wide, we want to think about when we're drawing maps, protecting communities of interest. And if the community is like 80, 90, 100% of the county, then that is less helpful for the map drawers. And then when you are giving your own testimony, whether that's online or in person, we like to ask folks these three questions to think about. So does the community have a shared culture, characteristic, or bond? We've been hearing a lot of personal stories, which we highly recommend. We've heard stories about communities coming together during forest fires or during COVID-19, and what brought them together, what sort of resources did they share? And I mean, it doesn't have to be a crisis. It could be a ceremony that they hold every year in their neighborhood, right? So basically, what makes you unique from your surroundings? And then, is the community geographic in nature? Can it be mapped? We highly recommend that folks talk about the boundaries of their COIs, and that's COI, COI. So if you can give street names or maybe a landmark, something that tells us where your community is, so we don't accidentally cut through your community. And then finally, what is the community's relationship to the county, and how is it affected by the policy decisions made by these elected officials? And I believe the chair will help us go through the examples of what a community of interest is. Sure,
Or do you want to hand it off to me? It doesn't.
I'll control it.
Okay, very good. So is this a community of interest? So a group of renters who live in downtown Stockton testifies to the county redistricting committee. So would this be considered a community of interest? A group of renters, I mean, you just heard the question and the answer is yes. So the group of residents can easily be mapped into a district area, and they can share a common interest policy, which can be addressed through legislation or public services. Historically recognized town dating back to the late 1800s, but has a minimal population is within the lines of the county. Should the county redistricting committee prioritize this historical town when drawing their maps? Again, yes, the historical communities are recognized as a community of interest and should be considered when drawing maps. This is the one that particularly is great interest to me because a group of almond and walnut farmers concentrated in the rural unincorporated area of the county focused on ensuring that they have enough water for the orchards. Would their committee consider this a community of interest? Yes, it would. This is a group of people in a shared geographic area and who have a similar needs for public service. A statewide group of people who are fans of the Giants testifies to the local redistricting committee. Is this a community of interest? No, because the Giants are winning day after day after day. It is important that the community of interest is distinct enough to draw on a map This group overlaps throughout the entire state, and it is unlikely that a governing agency has any say over these issues.
Excellent.
So it's all back to you.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
We do like to give examples because a community of interest can be hard to define and grasp. So I'm happy to take questions at the end of this if anybody has questions on it. But now I'm going to talk about the best ways for you to give your own testimony to the committee. So here you see the community of interest form. So a COI form, you can find this on the website, and I'll have a link to the website at the end. It will ask you step by step all the questions that we need answered. So it's easy on you and easy on us. And then Districtor is the public mapping tool that is available also on the website. It's here so you can draw 2 different types of maps if you want. So community of interest maps, which we're accepting now through the end of the process, and then district plans based on the 2020 data. And we're really going to encourage folks to start drawing those after we get the finalized data. But you can absolutely play around with it on Districtor as well. And I want to emphasize that basically everyone in the country is like 9 months behind because we have gotten this census data so late. So I want to urge the public to get their maps in, get their submissions and testimony in as soon as possible, so we can start drawing. And my colleague Chris will give a presentation on how to use Districtor at the end. Should be fairly simple. It was created by Tufts University specifically for everyday people to draw their own maps. So we'll go through a presentation on that at the end of this. And then of course, if you're in the City Hall with us today, there are these maps that we have just outside. You can draw your community of interest within the entire county or within the area of Tracy. There's also a huge map of the county over there if you would like to draw on that. So you are welcome if you're in person to grab one of these or come up to the front and draw your communities of interest that way. And then finally, here is our schedule that will take us up to November 10th. So today, obviously, September 15th, it is the second workshop that the RAC is hosting. The third one will be September 29th. We will also have the same spiel out there. So if you want to come back, ask questions, then give a testimony, then you are more than welcome to do that. We hope that you encourage your friends and family to come out as well. And then October 13th and 27th, we're going to start shifting over to draft maps. So the public is welcome to comment on that as well. And then that leaves us to November 10th when the RAC will be recommending a map to the board. All of this information is on the website wedrawthelines.sjgov.org. So you will find the COI form there, you'll find Districtor there, you'll find the agendas, all the information you need to know about San Joaquin County redistricting will be up there. And that is the end of this presentation. Chris, do you want to start doing Districtor or take questions now?
I think we're going to play the video.
Video. There's a video? Excellent.
Welcome to the San Joaquin County Redistricting Advisory Committee Mapping Tool Demonstration. This is one way you can submit information on your community of interest and inform the Redistricting Advisory Committee as to why your community should be preserved within one or more districts as they construct new boundaries this coming fall and winter. You can also submit information utilizing the community interest form on the website by emailing the committee or attending a public hearing. Information on each of these will be at the end of this video, and they're on the website. Let's get started. When you open the San Joaquin County Districtor page, this is what you will see. You'll see that there is a description of the supervisor districts and the county, some background information. We have some more information on San Joaquin County redistricting. And if you click on this website link, then you will go to the Redistricting Advisory Committee page and find out more specific information there. In Districtor, there is a couple of sections for the San Joaquin County Districtor page. You have the Start Drawing Your Community section, which we will click on in a little bit. It's this bright orangey red button, which will lead us to the Districtor map where we can start drawing community of interest maps. You also have the Public Gallery section, and here we can see we've already had a couple of submissions. So any of these will be used as community of interest testimony, and the RAC and the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors will look at this as testimony when they're drawing draft maps and final plans. There's also a section for work in progress maps and a section to find out a little bit more about the census data and San Joaquin County. So now let's start drawing a community of interest. So we go back, scroll up, and now you click on this orange red button. It's going to take us directly to the San Joaquin County Districtor site. And here we can see the border of the county. And you might be asking yourself, what are these light gray lines and why is the county broken up in this way? So if we remember about redistricting and the criteria about equal population and creating districts of equal population, we do that using census data. And here we see that the county is broken up into census blocks. And so that's why we have these gray lines. When you also first open Districtor, you will be directed to having the hand tool where you can click on the map and move the map. You can also zoom in and out by using your mouse. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there is a search bar, so you can type in any address in the county of San Joaquin, and it will zoom you specifically to that address. On the left-hand side, we also have a zoom in and zoom out buttons with the plus and minus, and a reset button to have your map pointing north. On the right-hand side, again, we have that pan tool. And if we click on the brush tool, it will take us to the area where we can start drawing maps. You have this really dynamic tool for the brush stroke size. And we'll see that if we move the toggle all the way to the right, we can grab a lot of census blocks. And if we move it to the left, we can grab less. You have the erase button, which is what it sounds like. We can erase anything that you would like to get rid of. And you also have the inspect tool. So if you hover over a specific census block, it will give you specific information on that block based on the 2020 census data. So we'll go back to the paintbrush tool to start drawing some districts as an example, or community of interest as an example. So when you want to click on an area, you just go ahead and click away and it will grab the census blocks. And right now it always starts with the color blue. You can add as many communities of interest as you would like in this community of interest tool. So we can add as many as we want. For the Districtor community of interest tool, you will be able to overlap some areas, because we do know that some communities have overlap. There's some similarities, and if you'd like to describe that in an area, you can do so here. You will not be able to overlap districts in the Districtor tool for drawing specific map plans or partial districts, where you are able to do that here. If you don't want your communities of interest to overlap, then you can click on the Lock Already Drawn Districts button. And now when we try to grab some of the blue, it won't let us. At any point, when you're drawing your communities of interest, you can go down to the selection area and you can see which communities of interest you have already drawn. To name those, you click on the color, and now we can name a specific district. I'm going to name this work. And in the description box, you can add as much description as you would like. And you can tell us where that specific community is, what bonds your community together, what's important about it, and then how your community relates to the San Joaquin County Board of Supervisors. We have an area called important places. So we know that while there's our communities of interest that are vast geographies, we also know that there are specific locations that are important to communities. So to use the important places tool, you click on this blue button with the pin drop, and now we're able to add specific points. What's different here with the important places is that any place that you choose, the dot will not change color. So there will always be red dots, but you can also name these. So if we hover over this dot, we can see that it is the first point that we created. And if we name it, and now if we hover over that point, then it will be called something else. Oh, we named the second one, it's called Dog Park. If you'd like to get rid of a specific point, then you click on this little trash can button and it will get rid of any point that you would like to remove. You also have this description box here to add any more information about your specific location. And we can think of locations as amenities, but locations could also be a nuisance to community members around an area. So if we think of a stadium, people could really like it because it brings in folks to the area. You know, you can go to a ball game, but neighbors in another area may think of that specific stadium as a nuisance because parking may be really difficult during specific times when there's games, or you could have other folks walking around that you may not want to be there. So having this location point is something that you can use and add and expand on for your communities of interest. We also have a data layer tab. So if you click on this tab, you'll be able to see a couple of other layers. So you can show the community numbers. You can show your census geography and block groups or tracts. And we can also see municipalities. So these are the cities in San Joaquin County. So if we zoom out, we'll be able to see a couple of the cities. You can also look at some demographics. So you can show the total population. You can look at Hispanic, Asian, and Black population of the county. And you can also look at citizen voting age population, which is the data set that is used for Voting Rights Act districts. So again, we have that for Hispanic, Asian, Black, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander and American Indian. The evaluation tab is something that we see more often used in Districtor when you are drawing specific districts. We know that you don't need census data to describe your community. You don't need to look at any other data set to do that. This evaluation tab shows the communities that you've created and compares it to the county of San Joaquin. So again, it's here to look at, but we see it to be most useful tab when you are drawing districts or partial districts, which that will come after we've used this as a community of interest tool. Now, to save your map, there's a couple of ways that you can share it. You click on the save button and now another window will pop up and you will be able to share your map to the gallery, which is in that section on the Districtor San Joaquin County page. And you can name it so that we can look at it and reference it. You can share your Districtor map by copying this URL and sharing it with friends, family, neighbors. And you can also share it with folks when you add it to the gallery and then send that link to your community members. If you click on this button all the way to the right-hand side, it gives you a couple of other options for how you can share your district plan. You can share it as a PDF, so you can print it out, or you can also share it as a mapping file called a shapefile and use that and look at your specific file in other mapping softwares such as Maptitude or Esri. So this is open to the public. Anyone can submit their community of interest plans, and we look forward to looking at your district or community of interest plans. Thank you. For more information on how to get involved, check the San Joaquin County Redistricting Advisory Committee redistricting website at this address. Here, you can find out how to get involved in the process of redrawing your supervisorial districts. From the website, you can find the schedule of hearings, submit testimony by emailing the Redistricting Advisory Committee, fill out a community of interest form, and find the link to the mapping tool so you can draw your community of interest.
Okay, now I was thinking of doing a mapping session with the rack, or we can use the new button. The new button is called, or in purple, that says San Joaquin County 5 supervisorial districts. So I'm hoping that we can be a little bit interactive, but I was going to start by just going through the differences between the district option and the COI option. So as you can see, again, you have the map of San Joaquin County with the hand tool, the paintbrush, the eraser, and the magnifying glass. To start drawing districts, you just click on the paintbrush tool. And in this one, you see that there's now an ideal population that pops up at the bottom. We need to have each district be roughly or exactly 155,000 people, 847 as an ideal population, if we wanted to have a zero deviation plan. So I'm going to start drawing this blue district, and I'm going to start up in the northeastern corner. And as you see, as I draw in on the map, you can see that the population is increasing up to that ideal population of 155,000 people. So I'm going to draw a district that goes across the top of the county and then does not go into Stockton, comes all the way south. And again, I'm not trying to say that this is something that should be done. I'm just operating this for your pleasure to see how easy this is to do, how easy this is to do. So I'm actually going to go and, oh, well, that's way too much. So I can use the eraser tool. I can back myself out. And I can say, okay, I'm just going to underpopulate this one. So now what I was thinking is, since we're in Tracy and we've got the our wonderful chairs from this area, from District 5, if Mr. DeBrum would like to have me draw a District 5 of his choosing. And this time I'll zoom in so you can actually see where Tracy is. And Steve, if you want, you can just describe what you want me to do to draw this district line, or we can move on to the next thing.
This looks like my visualization. Is that what the word of the day is?
Yes,
So-
that's the word.
Actually, what you had put out there actually looked just like District 4, what you put in there. It is pretty much where we're at. So if we were to look at Mountain House, Tracy, come all the way down to the line, we're just going to see if where we're at. Shooting for that 155,000 mark. Now cut it over to Ripon.
Okay.
Okay, so now you're over.
So now I'm over.
Yeah,
So I think
so,
one of the things I just want to show you too is that on this data layers table, you have the option of adding municipalities. So you can see like Ripon, Tracy, and it says municipalities, but it's actually census designated places. So you can see that Mountain House is also outlined, even though that's not a city. So yeah, so this is a little bit too big, so I could then back out, maybe subtract this part, go back to population. So that would be almost ideal. But again, we're going into Lathrop and looks like Manteca a little bit too. In the bottom down here, I don't know what this road is, but
that's, kind of looks like 120.
yeah, it does. So that's how simple it is to use Districtor. And one thing too, I think as you start drawing district lines to realize is you can also lock a district. So I've drawn this blue district. It's underpopulated, but if I don't want the yellow to infringe upon its lines, like once I click that lock already drawn districts, it won't take from the blue district. It'll just
Right.
expand it out.
And just for clarification, the part that was white down there, you either are going to have to put that into 4 or 5. You're going to have to then make your adjustment elsewhere because to make sure that's contiguous.
Exactly. I think you can give the
Contiguous line.
presentations going forward. The other thing as you do this, and maybe you're close to the end, you can also highlight these unassigned areas and it'll outline the blocks that are unassigned.
Gotcha.
So you can see like, look, I didn't, even though I traced it, I thought I did, I left some spots in Tracy and Mountain House and along the edges that weren't assigned to the yellow district.
Gotcha. So just for curiosity and a question I had and a note that I had made, are you able to either put in zip codes or and to get a population base? So let's say you wanted to know, I want to know what the population of Tracy is. How can you make that determination? Just to give you the population of Tracy?
Not directly off. I mean, you'd have to draw it, right? So I would
Okay.
come in and try to trace this area.
Right.
That's, I mean, the easiest way to do it through Districtor. I think if the RAC is also interested in knowing population totals for the census designated places within the county, we can provide a report of that. Ideally, we'd wait off until we get the final data set from the statewide database, but we can do that for you.
So while you're over there, can you tell me what the population of Tracy and Mountain House is?
So if you put them together,
Just a
roughly,
visualization. That's
yeah,
all it is.
roughly,
Not drawing no lines.
yeah, it's about I forgot that part. It's almost a full district. It's 149,000, and you can see I did include some of the unincorporated county along the western border. And actually, I think I'm just going to draw to the river. So this portion here in yellow, and might as well take in this area down here. That's 151,000 people, roughly. Because there may be a couple census blocks that I didn't pick up in Tracy. Oh, wait. Sorry, it's not right. me get rid of all that. So it's 137,000 people. But again, for the RAC, what we can do is once the statewide database comes out, we can provide a census designated population for all of the census designated places in the county. So if you wanted to, you could kind of like play with the math on combining cities and CSDs. So
Where is the river?
I thought this
Oh,
was,
there it is. Okay.
I roughly use the river in this.
So who else wants to play with this thing? Go ahead.
Chris, is there an element of the tool which allows you to click all of Tracy, put it in? In other
No.
words, the municipality lines are there. I can't just say, add all of Tracy to
Yeah.
start the district.
It's because it's such a simplified program and really built to just be a paintbrush eraser operation. You can't toggle like a lot of GIS programs and say, I want to take all of Tracy, I want to take all of Mountain House, I want to take all of Lathrop, and just automatically add them.
So you'd have to modify the paint size down to a smaller number than 20 if you wanted to be really precise and get in there and
Totally.
just choose that. That'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah. So like if I wanted to like just trace this line, I might make it like small, really small, like 4. And then I can be very precise, right, in my mouse movements. And even there, I just got a little bit out. But yeah, you can do it if you're patient and okay with making mistakes, going back, kind of erasing out the unincorporated county surrounding the city lines.
Yeah, that doesn't seem entirely useful, only because you probably would include those anyway. So I'm just trying to anticipate the IT questions that someone in the public might be thinking of as they go through the tool. Like, well, can I just start with Tracy? No, you can't, but you can use a smaller paint size to try to be precise if you need to when you're making your own maps.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Chair Esau Hernandez, your District 2 alt, had a scenario that he would like to propose, if you would like to recognize him.
Yes. Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you so much, Chair. I was just thinking about possibly a commuter corridor, a commuter district of maybe incorporating Mountain House, City of Tracy, the west part of Ranch. I think it's a community of interest because they're mostly Bay Area commuters.
Can you repeat
Ace
the
Train.
final?
Yes, it was Mountain House, Tracy, the west side of Lathrop and Weston Ranch. Sort of like a commuter district. I think a community of interest would be, those are primarily commuter residences.
And
Right there.
this would be Western Ranch, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that looks pretty good. I'm sure I've missed a couple census blocks. I think the question really becomes what line you want to use in Lathrop for the west side. Looks like there's a main road that I could trace.
I believe even if we needed to use the east side of I-5, but I think the majority with River Island being a very, very big population now in Lathrop, with everything on the west side of I-5, I would like to see what it would look like if we needed more people. I'm sure that we can grab from the east side of I-5.
I think that's the east boundary. So I think you'd need to, this is a little bit big, but it's 13,000 over, or a little bit under 13,000 over. But I think ideally this is one of those where it's great to try this out on your own, come back to the map, move areas back and forth to try to balance all the districts, all the 5 districts to your liking.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Want to bring him back up front. Do we have anyone else?
Chair, I have a question if it's okay.
Yes,
for me
sir.
to ask Chris. Chris, I had a general question. In your experience and in working in other cycles, how often does the redistricting process result in significantly different maps? In other words, do district maps typically only change by small modifications to prior maps, or which seems likely to me, or have there been circumstances where you'll see a map schema from one redistricting process to the next that really significantly changes the way that the districts are drawn?
So from my experience and from doing this starting in 2011 to the present, it really depends on the population shifts and the growth of areas. And it also really depends on whether a new Section 2 seat is required to be drawn in cities or counties or other agencies. Because what happens if a Section 2 seat is required is it becomes a stone on the map, or an area that you really can't change, and that you have to draw all the other districts around because it's required by the federal government and to maximize minority voting power. And sometimes what happens from between censuses is that an area maybe in the middle of a city or a county hits that 50+ point, meets all of the other jingles factors, and requires that Section 2 seat to be drawn. And that ripple effect, that change, affects all the other districts surrounding it. And really, because redistricting is really a zero-sum game, it causes all the districts to change. And so in areas that you have a large amount of growth over a decade, and you have shifts in the ethnic population within the city or the county or the agency lines, you may have that ripple effect in your district lines. And this has happened all over California. It just really depends on the city and the circumstance. In a lot of ways, though, if there isn't a huge population growth that's out of balance within the city or county, and you don't have that Section 2 issue or compliance, you often see agencies just kind of what we call rebalance their lines, where, like in the instance here, where we have that 22% total deviation, thinking through how you would transfer population from District 5 into District 4 so you meet that 10% total deviation, and maybe leave the other 2 alone, or make small changes to District 1, 2, and 3, but where the larger changes are in District 4 and 5. But again, I think we do need to wait for the Section 2 analysis to come forward before we kind of get there, and we should be talking about that at our next meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
I can just make one comment. I think what's interesting, and it's a great question. Our family moved here around 84, and around early 90s, District 5 encompassed Escalon, Ripon, Manteca, Tracy. So you can see where the change and shift in population growth has been. And of course, today we're looking at much larger growth here in the south. So yes, Mr. Mooney.
Yes, I was wondering, of course, I didn't catch it when you're going over it, but can we look at, like, a good example is the west side of Lathrop, that River Islands project is 10,000 homes, and I doubt that there was very many people were actually counted in that during the census, because it's right in the process of build out with 10,000 homes. Should we look at leaving that district lower, because that's in thinking future that all these people are coming in, or And the other one, I mean, I don't know how much development's going in Mountain House and Tracy, they're still doing a lot of build out. So would you look at holding that under on a negative side to compensate, but still be in our different deviation?
Great question.
I think that's a great question. And I think it's something to bring forward on the 28th to talk through like additional criteria that we want to look to when we're drawing district maps. And I think growth is one of those ideas, right? Is do you want to underpopulate the areas or under deviate the areas, right, of the district lines in expected areas of growth? Like maybe they should have done that with Mountain House, right, in 2011. But again, like these are choices, these are policy choices by the RAC and the Board of Supervisors on how they want to look at growth. Because one of the things that we don't think about a lot of times with growth is we think about all of the new homes and the new developments, but we don't really think about the movement into the county from other areas, like maybe the Bay Area people coming in and moving into areas that maybe are not as densely populated now, but because of they're moving in with new families and larger, that it's more dense in 10 years down the road.
Yeah, exactly. Because what you're looking at Mountain House and the River Islands, it's not so much people moving around the county, it's people importing, increasing the numbers in the county.
Exactly.
So do you compensate or keep known areas of large developments? You might want to hold that district down a little bit, even if you can go on the negative side, as long as you're still within your 10%.
Exactly. And I think that's something that we should talk through. I think it's good to talk through now, but also talk through on the 28th, because growth, I think, is one of those that's really hard too. We're working with Butte County, where the Paradise Fire really devastated the county. And one of the districts is actually underpopulated by half. So their total deviation, I think, is like 82%. And so, you know, one of the comments that has been discussed a lot is over the next 10 years, Paradise is going to come back and there's going to have a lot of growth. So from a policy standpoint, does it make sense to underpopulate that community greatly, like 7 or 8%, assuming that the growth is going to occur? I'm not the policymaker, the Board of Supervisors is. And so it's their like decision to make, but we're going to provide options for them to show this is what a underpopulation of 7% in that district around Paradise looks like, and the ripple effects throughout the other 4 districts. And we can do the same thing here in San Joaquin. If you want to say, let's underpopulate the Tracy Mountain House district by X, and we can draw the lines, right? And then let's have a more balanced plan where all the districts are closer together and the total deviation is smaller. And then you can see that map. So that's why I think that on coming forward on the 28th with kind of your thought experiments, or the other criteria beyond those 5 in the Fair Maps Act is really important.
Chair, can I make one more comment? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Chris, I just wanted to say, driven by the other priorities for redistricting, it would strike me as reasonable to think of this question about anticipating growth by underpopulating a certain district to be maybe a tiebreaker value. In other words, if we're having difficulty meeting the other criteria, and we have to choose, we're forced into a choice where we say, okay, well, there's no way to make this square the circle. There's no way to have 5 times 155. So we're going to have to, otherwise we're going to break some other part of our guidelines and laws. So maybe in that case, instead of flipping a coin, say, well, let's put these set of population blocks in this other district, because then it'll represent those places where we anticipate growth. It would seem like that would be the appropriate place to bring that consideration in. Does that seem reasonable to you, or does that seem unreasonable?
Definitely. I think the thing is that we want to do is we want to think of those 5 criteria that we've talked about: population equality, making them contiguous, following communities of interest, following other governmental lines, and compactness, those 5 as like our basics, right? We have to check all those boxes with any plan that we bring forward and that we recommend to the board. But then it's after that, right? After we get those 5 done, like what's the 6th criteria? What's the 7th? And the other thing is like, we don't have to be, these are the 6, these are the 7 that all the plans must follow. We could have one where let's have a growth map, right? Let's have I don't know, a rural versus urban map. Let's have for the 3rd one, have something else, right? A criteria that I haven't thought of that you guys have, or that comes up next on the 28th. But then what I think is really helpful is we can talk about everything theoretically, but once you see the lines, right, and you see the trade-offs that you make for the growth map versus the rural urban map versus, the highway map or whatever it is, then you can start seeing like the policy things that are going and the binary choices that you have to make in redistricting. And I think for me, if I could redistrict 10 years or every year, for the rest of my life, I would, because I love the interaction between geography, policy, and representation, because that's what we get to do, right? We get to think about what's the best way to represent the county of San Joaquin and all of its voters and all of its residents, so that the board is representative of the public. And that's such a wonderful, powerful thing to do. And to think that we get to do that and recommend something to the board, I think is a gift.
I think one of the real interesting pieces of the puzzle is the fact whether or not we'd make the necessary thoughts of putting those individuals who are coming into the community, whether it be Mountain House, whether it be Manteca, whether it be River Island, whatever the case might be, of underpopulating those. But on the other side, the fence, I can probably make the argument that say, well, how many people are going to be leaving the county and going out of state and moving on? Because we're hearing that each and every day.
But the great thing is you don't have to worry about it, right? You
Yeah.
just have the census population before you. And I mean, at the end of the day, the growth and the other factors that we add on, those are like the cherries on top, right? We want to make sure that everything else, the rest of the Sunday, gets created and is proportioned right, and
Right.
all the districts look good. And then we get to add sprinkles and a cherry and, I don't know, some caramel or whatever it is, your vice on your Sunday, but like adding that on as options to make it like a better map.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Chair, we've had a request from the public to pose a question regarding the District R tool.
Yes.
Ram, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for your great work. I'm a citizen. I'm experiencing this for the first time, and thanks to the magic of Zoom, we are all able to participate. Question on the tool itself. As the tool was being tried as just for experimentation and visualization, I noticed, for example, there were 2 sample districts that were drawn. One was blue and one was yellow. And the blue, for instance, had the way, in the sample was, for example, all the rural districts, and it covered a large area. And then the yellow was covering the Tracy and Mountain House area. My question is on the outcomes of redistricting and non-desired outcomes that potentially can happen. And we've heard about this, which is, can, for example, have a rural region take a small portion of an urban region and make that one district, thereby tilting the representation in the government towards, say, for example, one party. Is the commission going to look at what kind of parameters does the commission use at this point? Because, for example, you could take a city and break it into 4 chunks and then make it part of 4 different rural districts, thereby favoring, based on historical voting patterns, one government for representation for 4 districts. Is this something that the committee would be very conscious of?
So I think one of the things that's really important to remember is I talked about the 5 criteria that we have to follow under the Fair Maps Act. There are also 3 criteria that I didn't mention that we cannot follow. And that is we can't draw district lines with incumbents or candidates as a community of interest. And we can't draw districts to advantage any party. So those are 3 things we really can't do. So I think that helps to answer part of your question. I think the other question about splitting an urban center into 4 and attaching it to urban or to rural areas to draw 4 districts that are maybe have more population in the urban versus the rural, that would kind of break the community of interest idea, which is the heart of the Fair Maps Act and is the 3rd criteria that we have to follow. And I think we've already received a lot of community input about the importance of having rural representation and ag representation and the importance of trying to keep cities as whole as possible in districts. Whereas Stockton is too big to be in one district by itself. We've heard testimony about making sure that when we split Stockton, we split it from input from the communities. And I think one of the commissioners already brought up today about thinking about Western Ranch and how it is a lot of commuters live in Western Ranch. So maybe you could attach that portion of southwestern Stockton into more of a commuter district with Tracy, Mountain House, and the west side of Lathrop. Again, I think that's input that we've received, and I think it's something I think the RAC has heard. So that, I mean, that's like the technical answer, but if someone from the RAC would like to answer,
May
I
I
leave that to you.
May I give a hypothetical example just to add to what you had to say? Supposing there were 250,000 people in Stockton. So I think 156,000 was the number that was the approximate cutoff. So now you have 100,000 people. Potentially, in order to keep the contiguous districts, you could take those 100,000 people, break them into, say, 3 parts, 33,000 each, and then attach them to the rural districts that surround Stockton. What potentially might happen is the lack of representation for those people who are from Stockton, who have similar community interest. And then the rural vote bank is potentially different. And therefore, you end up with 3 districts that have a different representation, and then 1 district for Stockton with the 156,000 population. So in such situations, typically are there overriding and stack ranking of criteria?
I think, again, like splitting Stockton into 4 districts would really go against the idea of community of interest testimony that we've received so far. So I don't think that the RAC is going to ask me to, or our team, to draw a district map that splits Stockton 4 ways. But anything is possible. But I think really the spirit would not see Stockton split into 4 districts and with 1 main district in Stockton, and then the other 3 parts distributed for population equality to the rural areas of the county.
Okay, thank you. One last question. So when you come up with draft maps, would you then compare that not as input, but as output and say, can we cross-check this with the voter registration and say, which party is likely to benefit from this? So this is not tenable and we have to redo it. Would you have such a check and balance?
So the Fair Maps Act really doesn't call for a competitiveness rating of the district lines. And it really, for local jurisdictions, we just use residency information, or sorry, population from the census to balance our district lines. We don't look at voter registration information in a normal course of business.
Got it. Okay, so that's probably one of the reasons why the outcomes are shaping up the way they are. But thank you for trying.
Thank you
I'd like to
to our caller.
let me point out that actually Stockton is already split into 3 different districts as far as the city goes. And the other side of that is our guest speaker is more than welcome to submit a map, go on to District R and submit a map, what he thinks would look good.
Yes, sir. I was just using Stockton as an example, but more the spirit of taking a district that is slightly over 150,000 in our case, in the San Joaquin County case, and then taking chunks of it and mixing it with certain voter demographics that would favor one party or the other. That's really the outcome that one needs to worry about, really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Oster.
I wanted to make a comment to the wonderful question that was asked by our person remotely making the comment. But I'm not, although I am not an attorney, I am aware that previous redistricting processes in many jurisdictions are subject to court challenge after the fact. And so these guidelines that are presented to us are not recommendations. These are legal requirements. And if we were to do some funny business to summarize all of the hypotheticals the caller suggested, we'd be in trouble. You know, it's not something that we can say, well, we're going to try to play around with this and get something goofy that we want. We're not allowed to do that. And the guidelines that are presented to us are matters of law, state and federal, and is in our best interest to present fair maps, as the law coincidentally suggests, and that we follow the spirit beyond any sort of particular guidelines that constrain us. We really want to follow the guidelines of the spirit of what is presented to us, and doing a hypothetical of that way is certainly an interesting mental exercise to try to understand what the boundaries are of the process. But I don't believe anyone on this commission, and none of the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors, would ever propose a map, a set of maps whereby we intentionally watered down or highlighted other kinds of, like, it just not, that would never happen, and it would never survive court challenge after the fact.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Oster. I'm in agreement with you. I think they may not be intentional efforts, but the pure math suggests that there could be unintended consequences. And since there is no way to verify that the outcome potentially could favor a certain vote bank, as that's not one of the criteria, that could be a potential undesired outcome. That's all I was referring to.
And
Excellent.
I'm with Mitch Oster. That's not going to happen on my watch. We're not splitting up stuff that way.
I was just going to say that, and that's an excellent point, because it won't happen here. Okay. Do we have any other questions from up on the dais? Do we have any questions from anyone online?
No further questions online.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And Chair, I just wanted to clarify that those were visualizations that Redistricting Partners was sharing with us, just so we can all appreciate the use of the tool, District R tool, and begin to conceptualize what the lines might look like. But those were in fact not maps, just visualizations.
That's an excellent point, because you know, it's a process that we need to go through, and I think this is the first opportunity that we up here, and those who have been watching online have had that opportunity just to see how the process works and what we need to be doing. Okay, what's next? Nothing there here? Okay, so we're going to go on to, we've already done the drawing of the communities of interest. Do either of you have anything? Nothing? Okay. How about public comment? Do we have anything online?
No further public comment online.
Okay. How about committee members? Comments? And just for clarification, when we meet on the 29th in Lodi, we're going to essentially go through the same process, correct? So we're going to do the drawings and everything else that we have today. And I think this is a real exercise that once we get there, because going through it today has provided us some background that we've got additional information that we're able to ask those questions as we proceed forward.